F5J competitions are all about air calling and launching as low as the conditions allow to complete the flight task. Although I'm a very experienced thermal pilot, I train frequently, making each practice session as challenging as possible by putting more limitations on the flight task than I would find in a contest. In this video, I fly a 10-minute round and follow these restrictions in order to make the task more difficult. One of the things I like to do is to add ballast to increase the plane's wing loading. This makes catching low-level thermals a little bit more difficult, but doesn't make it as hard as you might think. With these new lighter airframes, we're going to be flying frequently with ballast, especially in wind, and it's a really good idea to get used to how the airplane handles, tracks, and covers ground with the added wing loading. Now, just like with a contest where you have a short amount of time before the round starts, I want to really take a couple of minutes and tune into the air around me and determine how strong the thermals are down low. And I really want to tune into what the wind is doing, what the wind velocity and what the wind shifts are doing. Are they cyclic? Are we getting big shift changes or very subtle ones? Because I want to have a 100% certain call on air before I turn that motor on or the round starts. Now, depending on the conditions, I'll limit my launch to say 20 meters, 30 if it's not as good, but a very short motor run, say 2 or 3 seconds, well under the 30 seconds you're allowed. This really helps train you to tune into the low level energy of the air and helps you and trains you to commit to that air call read that you made on the field. Another restriction I'll give myself is to limit my max altitude per thermal, and you'll see this in the following video. I'll limit myself to about 200 feet or 60 meters, and oftentimes lower than that. That's just going to make you work hard because you're going to have to catch more than one thermal to fly a 10-minute round. So with the altitude restriction, it makes you really focus on calling the next thermal. So if you're, once you're locked into that first thermal, you got to be kind of looking around and feeling the air changes in velocity and shifts and so on, and all those other signs you can look for to finding that next piece of air. So if that thermal gets too crowded, falls apart, hits an inversion layer, something like that, you've got to have, a pretty high percentage air call ready to go. So when I'm practicing, I take far more chances, calling air or chasing that little thermal thread way too far downwind than I ever would in a contest situation where you have to be sometimes more conservative. But when you take chances, that's when you learn stuff. You learn more about your air calling skills. You learn more about flying your airplane at low levels. And, so you have to start your motor once in a while. But take chances, you'll learn more. Okay, it's a late fall day, September, high pressure, numerous small low-level thermals. It's about 76 degrees, 25 C-ish. Kind of nice day to go soaring. We're going to go ahead and do a 10-minute flight round here. If I had a read, just a really short motor run, heading right over to where I think that lift was. And you can see I'm pretty low. Now I do have quite a bit of ballast in. I got 1 pound. 450 grams of ballast, which I would not be carrying in a contest situation in these conditions, being so light. But this is training, and I want to challenge myself. So I'm going to compress the time a little bit. We're going to have 6 minutes of flying and a 10-minute round here. So I was up in that thermal. It was a pretty good core. I want to do it out and back. This is good training too. Get the airplane all the way back to pilot's position, head out back low, and see if I can reconnect to that thermal at a lower altitude than I left it. Kind of using some prediction, it moved a little bit to my right, and there it is. So I can hook up into that thermal again. See, I'm looking around, I'm already kind of thinking, where's that next piece of lift going to be? Because I don't want to spend all that much time in this thermal. You can see how it's moving down that tree line, going north to south. Very light prevailing wind. But hey, can I reconnect to that thermal again, even though now it's a lot farther away? This is kind of where the ballast comes in handy. It doesn't change your L over D specs, but it does allow you to go down that L over D glide path much faster. You can see I've got good energy carry all the way down to the field there. And even though it was a little hard getting into it that low because the thermal was mature, I was able to score it and hook up to that thermal again. But of course, I'm always thinking about that next one. So just keep the airplane really smooth. After a while, you kind of forget about the ballast. So compressing some more time here. Work that thermal up. So I wanted to come back upwind, but I didn't want to go down that same trail that thermal left, because that's where the sink's going to be. So I was coming up just more towards the middle of the field. Plane was getting moved around a little bit, felt some drift, and banged right into thermal number 2. Just did a few turns on that. I was already getting pretty high. I had to read across to the west end of the field. You can hear the wind in the mic. His feet are going that way. I was in reflex, scooting across the sky there. Banged into obvious thermal number 3. We're still only maybe 4 minutes into my 10-minute round there. But I don't want to get over 200 feet, so flipped inverted, came across the sky, had a little bit of a read over the road there to the north end of the field. So I probed to the left first, but you can see how mushy the plane turned there, not energy. Now there's the energy right there, so I knew there was good lift there, but that's too easy. So I had enough altitude to do a search pattern down that corn row, and I'm going to a spot that I consistently find lift, even though I didn't really have any ground signs or any other signs that there would be lift there. So went pretty far down, plane felt mushy all the way, so it's time to bail out and come back in to that first read I got as I came across the field. Now, if I didn't hook up to this thermal, I was going to be landing out or having to turn the motor on, and I would not be able to finish that 10-minute round. But it was there and worked into it. There's my local hawk. Came over to join me for a little bit. I see him almost every time I fly here. And thermal number 4. And you'll see me get chucked out of that thermal right there. I just get pushed out right there. You can see let's get pushed out of it hard. Tail comes up, plane dives. Plane felt terrible on pitch, so I knew the thermal was kind of coming across the field. Now, I flew right through it because I had a pretty good read behind me. Definitely a wind shift and fill in. Now, this is a pretty risky call. In a contest, I would have stayed in that thermal right there and rode that one out, but hey, we're practicing, gonna take some chances. You can see I was getting pretty darn low behind me. It was a kind of a do or die situation, but taking risks is when you learn stuff. And I was able to work that lift pretty easily once I hit it, though it was pretty risky. Coming back across and tripped right into thermal number 6. We're probably 6 or 7 minutes into this 10-minute round, even though we've done some editing to compress the time a little bit. That's about as high as I want to go for my practice. Sure, I could have stayed in that thermal, but give myself some limits, go back into reflex, and let's go find something else. Plenty of thermals around, so even though if I didn't have a ground call or a wind change, if I just did a nice, efficient search pattern, I would luck into something. So I went back over to my sweet spot at the end of the corn row looking for lift. It's a pretty good generating spot for some reason. And yep, there it is. There's thermal number 7. There's definitely something there. If I had enough altitude, I can easily make it back to my pilot position, even if I didn't find anything, and I'd probably find something on the way back anyway. So that was not a real risky call to go that far down to a place that I knew generated thermals pretty well. So there's thermal 8. We're getting towards the end of our 10-minute round already. So we're going to play around and come in. And actually I hooked a pretty nice thermal at about that altitude and took it out for another 5 minutes and another 3 thermals. But I got my 10 minutes in, took some risks, and that was a pretty good training session. And I've kind of forgotten that the ballast was even in the airplane still. It flies great. This is the Vixen 2 crosstail. Super airplane. Waiting for the hand catch. Take a break and go for another little practice session. Go for another 10-minute round. So, good flying day.